So the second metric in the 14 points is leads. So we talked about logic, which means that every task has to have a predecessor and successor. And now we're talking about the relationships. So a lead means that there's a negative number associated with that predecessor or successor. Say this task happens after this one. It can happen 5 days prior to this one finishing. So there's a little bit of an overlap. That can really mess up a schedule. So DCMA says there's a 0% tolerance for leads, saying that you can't have negatives. Or if it says you want this one to start a different one where it's 3 days prior to this, that's a negative lag and it's not allowed.
So a recap on leads. What is it? It's any incomplete task that has a lead in its predecessor. So why is this important? Leads can distort your float, which we all know that when we're looking at float, we're talking about our critical path. The leads can distort that. And then leads can also cause resource conflicts. So if you're putting resources into your schedule, you want to make sure that you're not using any leads. What field is used to calculate these? We're looking again at your predecessor and successor field. So how do you calculate it? You're going to count how many incomplete tasks have a predecessor with a negative and a number. And then you take that count and divide it by the count of incomplete tasks. DCMA wants you to work towards getting 0% of your schedule having leads. An example of this would be, say, in your schedule that has 441 tasks that are incomplete. So again, we're not using the total amount of tasks, just your incomplete number of tasks. There's 6 of them that have predecessors that have a negative next to it. So here's an example you can see over here that says task ID 124 has a relationship of a start to start with the task it's on, and the lead part of it is that negative number. So if you don't see a number, then that means there is no lag or lead. But in this case, seeing that negative means there is a lead. And then the length of the lead is the number that's behind it. It could be 55 days. In this situation, that's what it is. Or it could be longer or shorter. Or it could be weeks. It's whatever your metric is that you're using for duration. But this is what you're looking for. You want to see those minus signs in your predecessor or successor. And that's where you get the leads. And then to calculate this metric, we take that 6 tasks that have the negative and divide it by the 441 incomplete tasks, and we get a 1.36%. But again, DCMA's goal is to get us to 0. They don't want any in our schedule. So in project, we're going to be looking at our predecessor and successor fields, and we're going to filter on them. So we're going to filter on contains and put that negative in there. Then press OK, and it's going to pull up all the tasks that have a lead. You can see here that we do have some, and I'm going to show you what we can do instead of those leads. But this is how you would find them. And then you could also do this same filtering on the successor column. And then on the successor, it also has some leads. So let's talk about why we're using them and how we can fix this. So this top example is showing a lead, and it's just saying that when we're doing our contracts, there is going to be a document after negotiations that's called the Price Negotiation Memorandum. This document, though, can take a while to put together, so we want to get a head start so that way it's not as long, especially if we took a long time to do negotiations. So someone might tell you in a schedule that, yeah, well, we can start, we don't have to wait for negotiations to finish before we start that P&M, so let's put in a lead. Well, that's where DCMA doesn't want you to do that. It can really mess things up, especially with your critical path or your resources. So here's a different way you can do that. So with the P&M, there's different sections in it. So we listed them out here. I made the sections be children task under the P&M. So you can see that P&M, it looks like it's taking a long time by the summary task, but you can see that sections 1 and 2 can actually get started right when you start negotiations. There's certain things that can be filled out, and so then you can check off that yes, sections 1 and 2 are done. But then sections 3 and 4, they really do need to wait until the negotiations are done. So we're going to link them to the finish of negotiations. But this is how you can get that lead out of there. Understand what the relationship is for your task, and get with your team to understand, I need to get rid of this lead to make my schedule better. How can I do that? Another example of where I used leads was when you're doing testing. There's going to be certain reviews that have to be done so many days prior to the test. Now they have it figured out where it's so many days, like 1 day before the test, 30 days before the test, 2 months before the test, 180 days before the test. There are certain checkpoints and reviews before a test. And so if you backwards plan to say, okay, before this test happens, 120 days beforehand, we have to have this test readiness review. Well, you're going to use a lead to figure out what the target date is, but you need to actually put in there with that engineering and design, put the checkpoints in there. Break that task out even more and put it where those OTRRs and those test reviews can be driven by the engineering and design, not by the calendar days. You can use this lead to figure out what your target dates are and set those as deadlines, but you really need to do the forward planning and not the negative lead part of it. So a recap on leads, we want to look at the predecessor and successor fields for any negative relationship to another task. And you're going to count how many those are and divide it against your incomplete task total, and you want to get your percentage down to 0. Work towards it. It may be high at first, but as long as you work through it and slowly eliminate them, you're going in the right direction.